Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Haptics Club podcast. My name is Ashley from Titan Haptics. I'm joined by the Haptics crew here. We've got Brian from SenseGlove, we've got Eric from Razer, and Manu from Unity. The Haptics Club is a team of people that have a passion for haptics. Our goal is to raise awareness of all the amazing people and tech happening in the space and foster interesting discussions around it. We, of course, have a website at thehapticsclub.com where you can see our upcoming guests and our past guests. We've got a blog, hapticsclub.com/blog. And of course, we've got a store if you want a mug, t-shirt, tank top for the summer. Joining us today is Hongzi Tan, lead haptic scientist at Google. She is known for her research on perception-based haptic interfaces with a background in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. And personally, she's one of my heroes as one of the most influential women in haptics, a pioneer, a leader, and a path maker. There's a lot to talk about, a whole bunch to talk about. So we'll start with a brief intro, we'll dive into areas of expertise, and of course, we'll talk about the future of haptics and cover challenges and interesting things happening in the haptics industry. Be sure to visit thehapticsclub.com, sign up for our newsletter, and don't miss our next episode, which happens every other week. And last but not least, we would not be here if we didn't have our sponsors. We would like to thank the Haptics Industry Forum, a haptics association, which has created a streamlined haptic standards and adoption, fosters collaboration, and increases market awareness. But let's stop there. Are you ready to talk haptics, guys? Handing it off to Brian.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for the opener. Hong, welcome to the Haptics Club. We're so happy to have you here. As Ashley already mentioned, you have quite a track record. Could you, for the listeners, shortly introduce yourself and tell us something about your background?
Oh, sure. Hi. First of all, thank you for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everybody who's listening in. So I came from an engineering background, was interested in particular how a group of deaf and blind individuals use their hand to receive speech. It's called the Tadoma method. And we were interested in creating aids for these individuals, but also take what they can do and learn from there to create other assistive technology. So I got into haptics by accident, you can say. And then instead of continuing on to study acoustics or other things, I just fell in love with haptics and sort of started from there. And over the years, I have become a pretty good psychophysicist. So for those of you who do not know psychophysics, and if you just tell it apart, it's like psychology and physics. I don't know if that makes sense. But the way I look at this is it's psychology, it's very quantitative, but more importantly, it builds a bridge between engineering and a perception, and it's a mathematical bridge so that we can start to use this formula to create engineering systems that actually match human sensory motor capability is sort of how I look at it. So it's a fairly unique field, very niche, and I've been a professor for 23 years and still counting at Purdue University. Recently, I got more and more interested in what kind of real impact we can make in addition to disseminating knowledge through publication. So I did a 4-year stint at Microsoft Research Asia. So that was like 2011 to 15. Figure out all the things I didn't know that I didn't know. So I'll count it as a total failure, just kidding. And then started over again recently with Google, hopefully knowing what I didn't know. I'm learning more. I'm currently working on haptics on the Pixel phones.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So you already mentioned that you accidentally got into haptics by starting to doing research for people that are blind. Can you tell us something about what really triggered your interest and made you stay within this haptics industry for all the time till now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I realized all the things we didn't know. So I was curious to reproduce the sensations a talking face would present to someone who cannot hear and feel. So we started building, who cannot hear and see, sorry. Yeah, so we started building devices, and I realized that we didn't know what resolution we need, what kind of range, what frequency range, amplitude range. force range and all that. But basically, what is the language that talks to the skin, right? So I just got sucked more and more into that, and just felt like there's so much more known about vision and hearing, but touch is very capable because I see people use their hand to get stuff that we normally do through hearing and vision. So I know the capabilities there. I just want to sort of, unleash that potential.
Wonderful. I could not agree more. Then I think we can move to the area of expertise with Eric.
Hey, Hong, thanks for the wonderful answers. So you mentioned that in the latest year of your career, you're focusing on how can we use the learning of tactile perception, haptics perception that you developed to unleash new technology application or new way to use devices that would unleash some new capabilities. And effectively, what are the key aspects of haptic perception that the market is not considering today and in the implementation of haptics device? And what is the value that can be derived from this application of these principles?
Yeah, so Eric, you and I both know that we can use a lot more psychophysics. We kind of preach about it all the time. I think we're beginning to realize, a basic thing about human detection threshold, which is what is the minimum vibration amplitude that human skin can perceive, and how does that value depend on frequency of stimulation, body size stimulated, and all that. And I think we're beginning to see that, and then I'm very glad to see that more and more people are incorporating this into kind of engineering specification, if you will, characterizing, actuator performance and all that. But there's so much more. So we just talk about detection threshold, and then there's also discrimination threshold, which is the smallest difference between two frequencies or amplitude that we can reliably discern. That could be very useful when we talk about giving people different levels, choices of how many levels of intensity they want to have in their system. Obviously, if you let them change so small that they can't even feel the difference, it makes no sense, right? So that is another metric. And then if I would just fast forward, jump to the biggest field, which is what is the information capacity of a human user when it comes to haptics? So I'll give you a practical example, which is how many different signals can you create on a phone, on a watch, on a vest? Doesn't matter if you have one actuator versus 20 or 40 actuators. How do you think about that? So I feel like I'm one of very few people who's a bit obsessed with information transmission, but since I have the forum here, I'm going to give it a shout. There's a lot that can be gleaned from looking at the literature, looking at how effectively we can transmit information through various parameters. So, what are the usual suspects? Amplitude, frequency, rhythm, duration, body size, number of actuators, and all that. So we started a whole series of work trying to characterize how each variable can contribute to the amount of information you can transmit. So information may seem very abstract here, but let's just think about number of different signals you can transmit, right? Say I'm on the phone and I feel a vibration. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, other than being alerted, I actually know what that vibration means, right? So immediately the question is, how many different signals can you create? How natural are they? How well can people immediately figure out what they mean, and how well can people remember? I set ringtones on my phone for different callers, and then a couple of months later, I don't remember which ringtones for whom anymore, right? Is there something we can do with haptics that may either complement that or, take its unique properties, stuff like that?
I do agree that it's a really interesting area of research to basically understand what is the communication bandwidth that we have in the different body parts and for different devices. However, if I need to draw a parallel between vision and sound, we do have a sort of semantics that allows us to describe what we hear and what we see, and the things that makes a connection with reality, and we have rendering capabilities for the screen and the audio that are much, let's say, much more near the capability of the brain to make this connection between what is virtual and what is real, right? However, sometimes in haptics, we say that we are not as near as for the other sensing. So I understand. Let's imagine that we have a n number of signal that we can distinguish. But however, how can what is for you an effective way to teach user actually what each of these signal means without going through a really lengthy period of training for the specific device, and also potentially the fact that different ecosystems will have different meaning for the same signal, that which might just confuse people.
I guess at some point we'll talk about standardization and all that, but we'll leave that for later. Yeah, wonderful question. I sort of go back to my previous comment. We don't quite know how to communicate with the skin, and we lack vocabulary. We lack consistent interpretation of the same word. When I say a vibration soft, what do you think it feels like, right? So stuff like that, or should we create more vocabulary? Yeah, so the only thing I think we have some understanding of is like this recent project we started on communicating speech through touch alone on the arm. And we have a system called a TAP, so it's tactile phonemic sleeve. So what we have done was we basically have multiple actuators on the forearm, and we create different signals based on the knowledge we have about how to make signals distinct using a whole bunch of parameters that we talk about. And then we started mapping them to phonemes, right? So what I want to say is a first step is that the signals need to be distinct, obviously. So there's the science and practice of that. Number two, how do you map meanings to them? And I think that's just a vast open research question. The thing we have tried to do is sometimes give people context. So tell them that this is in the context of a camera, and then you give them a vibration, they'll be like, oh, that feels like a shutter. But if you don't say anything, you give them the signal and nobody knows out of blue, like, what are you trying to deliver, right? So in our case, we were mapping to something very abstract, but the reason we map it to phonemes is because we want to leverage people's language ability, and then we can, once they learn the mapping, then they can very quickly, do English words. This is where we wanted to get to. So in that particular case, we had to use a lot of tricks. It's like, if a sound is on your lips, we're going to deliver it near your wrist, because that's the front of your mouth. If a sound is glottal, we're going to deliver it to your elbow, because that's the back of your mouth. And if you use tricks like this, you can kind of latch onto them fairly quickly. And then we also use signal modulation to make the vibration feel heavier. So that way we say, if you feel a modulation on a 300 hertz signal, it's voiced. Otherwise, it's unvoiced. So p and a b are identical on the lips, and the only difference is voicing. So we try to use that to get people to say, you feel two similar signals, but one feels heavier, the other feels lighter on your wrist. The lighter one is P, the heavier one is B, right? So you do this kind of thing. And then we use that platform to see how well, number one, people can learn these things, and we find out that people can learn them within a few hours. And we also want to see how well people can retain this. So in one of our data set, we decided to call back people anywhere from 3 months to a year after they've been through this kind of training. And we just put them through phoneme recognition again. I have to check the paper, but I remember it's somewhere around 60-70% that people were able to recall what those signals mean. So these are limited data, but I think they're fairly promising, because we're talking about a whole set of like 39 phonemes, so that's a lot of signals, right? So I'm very curious if we want to try something that's a bit smaller, like 5 to 10 signals, very well curated, and then, you know, go from there. Yeah, so that's all I know.
Yeah, I mean, that's great because it shows that long-term memory, where it's there, or at least there is a way to retain these things in the long term. And the challenge is to create a meaningful semantics that allows people to associate the haptic feedback to the multisensory experience and get that meaning shared to a meaningful number of people. I'm sure these things will make a ton of sense for accessibility, and because there is probably a real need, and there is probably the willingness of the user to overcome the challenges of learning something new, or at least to the friction of learning something new. It's compensated by the value. Things that I'm continuously struggling to understand on my side, and this is a personal thing, is that what is a key use case where we would be using to overcome this resistance of people to learning anything new, because at the end of the day, that's more or less what we are. You know, we want to reduce the number of effort that we put on anything, right? That's what our brain wants to do. Do you have any idea what would be the first use cases where you would see this language, let's say, call it language, haptic language, appear?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we don't identify or receive signal through vibration alone in daily life, right? It's always associated with some sort of sound, sight. So I feel like the first step is we can use haptics perhaps to enhance something. So I'm thinking about the work that my student did on Palmscape. It's a display for the hand, and he was actually a designer. So we had raindrops, we had bubbles, we call it the jacuzzi signal, very relaxing. We have thunderstorm. So what we were trying to do is give people an imagery in a context, and then create signals that somehow mimic natural phenomena. So for example, for raindrops, it's a sort of, you know, you have these but then we vary the frequency in a very narrow range to make it seem more natural, because, you know, when rain drops on your hand, it's slightly different in intensity, frequency, and all that. But we also perturb the duration slightly within a small range, so it's no longer da da da. It's like da 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 da, right? So that creates the organic feeling and all that. My guess is that if you start to see the word raining, feel the signal, or hear the sound associated with raining, is it possible that after a while you put your phone on vibration only because you don't want to disturb people and you happen to feel the signal? Maybe you recognize, oh, it's a rainy day today, is what I'm thinking. But starting from haptics alone, I think is very challenging, and it may not be natural anyways. I don't know if that helps to think about this in a slightly different way.
No, I think it does answer, or at least it does help to position an answer to a question, which is, I mean, I try to resume is that we are looking at multisensory. However, we don't have yet a clear idea of which types of use case would be the first one that would have emerging this potential semantic language for haptics. But we are still in the discovery phase, and maybe hopefully there will be some, you know, independent design language development that would help to create some reference signal, like maybe like like in sound for a yes or no, and haptics maybe come out from that and people get accustomed to that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting topic and really challenging. And the open question that we might always have is that, is it actually bringing tangible value that to the end user that would overcome this friction of usage? That is, I think, an open question. And hopefully, yes, probably in some cases, yes, maybe in automotive on some related field where even you have to pay attention somewhere else. Question is would be like a widespread use, or it would be more application driven, and where we have for video games, this is the type of things that, okay, simulation or more natural things is interesting because, there is a rain in video games, you want to get more immersion, that's the need. And for automotive is something completely different that is related to the application. But jury's out. Let's maybe change a little bit and shaky things up. So you are since long time in the field, and if you have a lot of students, maybe they are interested in haptics. Some of them maybe continued in haptics. So what would you like to share to someone that is a newbie in haptics regarding on what should they pay attention for?
Yeah, so haptic is such a broad field. I know a lot of colleagues have wonderful courses and all that. I myself also attempted teaching a course and immediately realized that if you want to do justice to haptics, then you have to span, I don't know, robotics, hardware, software, computer graphics, because we borrow a lot of algorithms, psychophysics, and all that. So then I got intimidated. So I ended up with sort of just teaching a psychophysics class and give lots of haptics examples. I would say over the years, I have learned that it's much better for me to tailor to what the student's interest and the strength is. So let me give an example. So the Palmscape work, the student is a designer. I don't think we could have done the work we did without his very unique design perspective. So I think of signals in terms of frequency, amplitude, duration, spectrum, and all that. And he's thinking about delightful. And I'm like, where do we meet in the middle? So we talk about perception, right? So there's a lot of teaching of him to me about design approach, and then me try to explain how varying the parameters will lead to different kind of perception, but then I leave it to him to take perception to whatever design goal he has, which was kind of really interesting. And I have other students who are very strong in control. So we have done things like how can you render the sharpest texture ever, like the blade of a knife or a sword, right? So that takes very fine control of hardware and software to get there. So we were able to get there. So to me, like, it's just looking at opportunity and say what you already know and what's your interest, and can we push the field a little bit further out. The fact that we still don't have a general purpose textbook on haptics, I think speaks to just how difficult, challenging, and multidisciplinary the whole field is. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I think it's okay. We all make contribution from different angles to haptics.
Yeah, well said, well said. And you've mentioned a few of your projects, Hong, so the Palmscape, the Tactile Sleeve, Palmscape. Can you tell us a little bit about, for anyone who's maybe doesn't know as much about your projects and achievements, just like a few of like notable contributions, some of like the projects maybe that you're just like the most proud of, and maybe even like a breakthrough in haptics that surprised you along the way?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so one of my earliest work, I'll say the earliest and then the latest. One of my earliest work was some consulting work to a company called Exos Incorporated, and they were later acquired by Microsoft Research. Beth Marcus was the president or CEO of the company at the time. She was building an exoskeleton. What's the English phrase? 6 million soldier or something, whatever. Basically a super duper exoskeleton that lets you jump to the roof if you need to, or carry very heavy backpack and all sorts of things. And the question was very simple, which is, tell me what kind of transducers should I use? What's the resolution? What's the range? What kind of force can people exert, right, on different joints, because they all have to fit on different, like they have to fit to your whole arm and whole limb, and all that torso. And I am very surprised. This is probably the highest cited paper I've ever published, and I was a nobody. I was just beginning as a grad student and all that, and that made me really reflect. Not to say very high citation, we're a very small field, but relatively. And then I went back and I read the paper myself. This is after Google Scholar citation it came out, and you're actually able to track these numbers. I realized that. We gave a lot of very useful, actionable data that enable people to build an exoskeleton. So what we did was a very unusual paper. We basically did a literature survey. Anything we can find in the research literature, we wrote a summary for that section. And if we couldn't find any results, we set out to do what we call quick but not so dirty psychophysics, because we didn't have the luxury of being very, very careful, but we want to make sure we design psychophysics in a way that we get to the right ballpark. And then we consider all the key parameters. So for example, for perception, gender probably plays a role, but not that much of a role. But if we're talking about force output, clearly, size matters, right? So then we look at sort of different percentile people and then try to see how their force output range differ and all that. So at the end of the day, if you look at the paper, it's like either this is what we know or this is the ballpark of where we should go. And then from there, you could go select your hardware components and all that and build your system. So I thought that was a very interesting thing. Maybe very early on, I always had a tickle for, working in industry and making some real impact there. But more recently, I think I'm more into what I call the science and art of information delivery on the skin. So it is really that tactile sleeve, which is all about information transmission in a somewhat abstract way, right? Because we're encoding phoneme. And the art part, that is the palmscape work. It's about just taking any opportunity to build signal that makes sense. So we talk about raindrop a bit. And then there's another signal called the earthquake. Now, if it was me, I would never think of earthquake because who has felt earthquake on their palm? But the signal design was, so the palmscape has 4 actuators under your palm. So the design was you start off with like 2 actuators, and then you spread it to 4. And then because they're fairly close by, what you don't feel like, oh, these 2 are on, now the 4 are on. You just get this general sense that the energy is spreading in space. And then we also just had these crescendo kind of signal, if you could imagine. It's like the energy just keeps pushing and building. So there's this kind of imminent danger things building up, both in space and in energy. And once you feel it, like if you ask people and say, what does an earthquake feel like? They're like, whatever. And then they feel that. And then we put it back and we're like, can you recognize it? And then they'll sort of push a few buttons like, oh, that's the earthquake, because it somehow captures some essence of things. So I'm very excited about this work because haptics is not about like reproducing every nuanced thing, but it's about doing proper subtraction so that you actually capture some essence of what you want to deliver. And if you do it right, then it becomes a very distinct and memorable signal. So I really like the earthquake signal in that regard. But the engineer inside of me just says, such chance discovery. But I think to a designer, it's just a process, right? You just kind of create, you try and all that. So I'm trying to get comfortable now at Google, working as well, to work with designers to see where their creativity leads us, but also try to remember at the back of my mind there are those signs behind things that we should obey, because otherwise we won't be able to deliver awesome experience.
Thank you, Hong. That's wonderful. We were you already mentioned earlier that haptics itself, it's already a very interdisciplinary field. We need each other a lot to build those very valuable experiences. We were wondering, what discipline do you think we could maybe rely even more on as hapticians?
So I think the quick answer is we need all of them. But recently, I've been calling out that we really need haptic designers. You probably got that sense already. And I think we were in Smart Haptics, we had a brief discussion about that as well. I think the difference between me designing signal and a designer is that I lack that aesthetic sense, like a viewpoint. I mean, I'm really good at designing distinct signals, but that's may or may not move the needle. Eric was asking, how can we do it in a way that haptics is widely adopted and all that? And I think it has to meet some sort of user needs. And this is where the design perspective comes in. Honestly, I'm looking for designers, anybody applying, right? But like, do we have any program that's remotely educating and preparing designers? I know a few, like, I think, yeah, there might be a few out there. I don't say there's none, but we just don't have enough.
I have a question, though, that goes on top of this. And you spoke a lot regarding bandwidth of communication, and right now about design. And since not many years, actually, but it's not even widespread, there is this new introduction of this, what we call wideband vibrotactile actuator, that have a capability to have a larger gamut of experiences. So how much do you think that our incapability to communicate, or at least our spectrum of the language or spectrum of the expressivity, was limited by the expressivity of LRAs or ERMs that are limited because they work on just one line, right? Or one frequency and multiple amplitudes, or one frequency amplitude line, compared to these new larger wideband actuators that allows a larger spectrum of experiences. Do you think that there is an impact on the that will be a tangible impact on the capability to express different things, or you think we will be back into this extremely difficult challenge onto creating a semantic for it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think hardware is so important. That's why I think academic research is extremely valuable, because if I work on pixel phones, I'm very limited by whatever actuator that can be put into a phone. But recently, I was collaborating with Professor Choi's group, a postdoc about automatically converting sound to vibration in gaming. They ended up experimenting with both an impulse actuator versus an LRA, because they just do different things, right? When you have a collision, you want a good, solid, really powerful collision. But if you have vehicle driving on road, you want to display, we call it texture, right? And then you need something that's of higher frequency. So when I say impact, it gives you a lot more at the low frequency end. And also in terms of sound, if you think about subwoofer, that's kind of where the low frequency resides. I totally agree with you. I think the more expressive the hardware can be, the better. Recently, I've been thinking just roughly that anything above 100 hertz, they can, we have frequency discrimination capability and all that, but they're more or less kind of very piercing, dense, kind of sharp vibration, right? And if you move to the lower frequency range, let's say at least 80 hertz or down, then things start to feel more solid, more rounded, more organic and all that. But that's exactly where the usual commodity LRA cannot deliver. They don't have a whole lot of output. So yeah, wide bandwidth actuator is really important. And then to put a small plug-in of our own research, we were also thinking that truly wideband actuator is really difficult to achieve. Can we just build, low frequency actuator and high frequency actuator and just put them next to each other, on a vest or something? Maybe they can complement each other and increase the expressivity.
Yeah, it's. I mean, in Italy we say "sfondi una porta aperta." It means that you're breaking an open door. So I tend to agree with you regarding the lower frequency expressivity. It's the things that experimentally we see also in Razer. We are looking at as low as possible, Let's put it in this way, which brings a different
Cannot
challenge because
go too low, right?
yeah, there's not such a thing as too low. If you use a D-box chair, there's not such a thing as too low, because lower you go, actually more discriminative power you have. But actually, it's much more natural because you go much more in the range of experiences that you have around every day, you know? And it's much less impact. It's much more organic, and I tend to agree here. Hopefully, we'll bring something to the table. And yeah, I mean, and the composition of actuators, I mean, we find it in sound, right? We have a subwoofer, and then we have a middle and a tweeter, and they are much more expressive because they are tuned for different frequency ranges. And I'd be happy to see if there is some consumer electronics company that actually will start to do that. The drawback is always the same. You need 2 actuators, it's double the cost. And you need a double of actuation systems, and you double the control systems. So you're actually, again, putting a BOM cost on top of it. And the question from market is it actually worth it? Is it something that we can sell for not double of the price, but a higher value? So yeah, the challenge is always this one. When we try to design devices, when I have a startup that pitches me, oh, you can add this actuator to that actuator, create that experience. You say, yes, but can I sell it at double the price? If the answer is no, yeah, it's complex. You know, it's difficult to justify actually the existence of 2 instead of 1. You know, and yeah, short digression. Ashley, to you for the future.
So if I may sort of jump in a bit and say, if I put on my professor hat, I will say, you people in industry, figure out the user value prop for haptics, and I will do the research to support you. I'm much more sort of now in the position, it's like, oh, maybe the burden's on my own shoulder to try to sort these things out. So that's one of the areas that I think, you know, user experience research on what value haptics provides to people, and then what kind of different values for different use scenarios. It's so important because that'll help drive the market. Anybody has figured this out?
I mean, there are video games. Come on, I think that's pretty clear and compelling use case, right? It's
well, you have one behind your neck, right?
Sorry.
You have one behind your neck, right?
Yes, this is the Project Carol. Actually, this is the haptic one. This is the one that you showed at CES. It's fun.
Yeah, no, this is awesome because now you can afford a little bit more space, right? Yeah. Maybe power you can relax a bit as well. So yeah, this is important to show people what we're capable of doing. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, that leads us perfectly into the future of haptics. Hong, in your opinion, what are the most promising areas or applications for haptics that have yet to be explored or realized or created kind of publicly?
I want to say we don't know what we don't know yet. I'm leaning so much on user experience research to say where are the opportunities. Some of the things you can sort of just imagine where I'll use vibration for, notification, reminders, and all that. Is there something we can do in that area? Gaming just seems like another area that's very interesting and promising, and people really value multimodal, more immersive experience. And we touch a little bit on standardization. I really feel like we keep avoiding it, but it just keeps tripping us up. My understanding is that if I were a developer, I'd be very hesitant to design signals for one specific hardware platform and then have to switch and learn entirely different haptic platform. If there's a way to author a haptic experience regardless of hardware, I think it's a very tall order. But let's talk about even just like 2 different vests. You know, is there a way, like if you specify you want a signal to appear on the left side, if you are hit, on that side, and then you switch to a different hardware, is there a way that, we can just readily port this over? That'll be a huge win, I think. And then hardware, we touched upon the need for a lower resonance kind of actuator, but they're necessarily bigger, bulkier, and cost more power probably. It costs more because they're not widely used as LRA. yeah, so all these areas, I just want more people. I just want more people to work in haptics, and then with everybody's creativity, whatever their interest, I think it will add to the knowledge and technology in this field.
Let me just comment on the concept regarding the transposing of haptic effect of the human body, because it's actually a hot topic in standardization, and there is, I think, a couple of concepts that has been put out that should help to solve the issues. I mean, the way that these people sees this is that, I mean, if you imagine that the screen is your human body, and you have an articulated number of body parts that are rigid bodies that are articulated on you, and you take the surface of each body part and you think about that as a screen, and you define a resolution of haptic actuator over this surface, pretty much like a visual resolution, then you can say, okay, this device has 40 actuator and I want my effect here, and that's this area. That's pretty easy, actually. We can use computer graphics technology or techniques to upscale or downscale to a different device with different resolution, maintaining a designer intention by having a projection of pixel one on top of the other. So I think that the strategy that is getting implemented into the standards is about taking this concept from computer graphics and applying as a concept of the human body as a screen. And of course, it's articulated, so each body part is related to a small screen, basically with its own pixel or tactile, whatever you want. And you can have this transposing of different devices and different types of technologies in a way that hopefully will try to preserve designer intention. At least this is a practical solution that has been found. I'm not sure it's the best solution, but it's a one that we know that works. Let's put it in this way.
Yeah, no, totally. At least this gives it a structure to proceed and do something. And then I think we're thinking about what we can borrow from vision and hearing, but the truth is, like, haptics is just so much more complicated. Not to mention that haptics is bi-directional, right? So by using vibrations, we're treating haptics like a passive thing. But most of the time, we are reaching out to things in order to feel what its temperature is, how much it weighs, and what its property is. So I'm thinking, like, there's a whole class of systems out there that are force feedback devices. They're much more intuitive to me. Once you feel the force, you just know, oh, it's a spring, right? It's a damper, because you can interact with it and to figure out. I'm pushing, a cube of ice because it feels so slippery, right? So force just intuitively tell us what's happening. I think for whatever reason, maybe mostly technological, we're relying so much on vibration to fake everything else in our daily interaction. There's got to be a limit. I have no magic bullet for how we're ever going to incorporate force feedback devices, in the near term into consumer products, for example. That just seems very far out. Yeah.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we rely now a lot on the vibrotactile side. We were wondering, how do you envision the haptic technologies evolving in the next coming years, and what impact do you think they will have on industries and everyday life, practically?
Look at Eric. Yeah. Broader bandwidth, we talk about that. More than one actuator can go a long way. I joke that, give me 4 actuators on the phone, 1 at each corner. I can do so much more. Yay! And in fact, I think, there's some research out there that once you can start to employ movement illusion and all that, you're, opening yet another big door towards, expressive and distinct and really playful signals as well. Yeah. So, I don't quite know where we're going, but I like to be optimistic and not worry too much about BOM and all that, and just say, can we find a compelling use case, user experience that really will kind of put us over the threshold of sort of, users being willing to pay the money to get that experience? You have a controller in your hand. I'm thinking about a phone because that's my job right now. Oh, yeah. and watch and all the other consumer products. Yeah. I'm hopeful we'll figure something out. Yeah.
Awesome. That leads to the final question in the future of haptics, which is, what do you hope the future will look like? And let's go far out. We can go 10, we can go even 20, if you're feeling it. Like, and this is like just pure, could be like anything at all. Yeah, you know, no one's gonna come back to you in 20 years and be like, but Hong, you said this, you promised this is the future.
We're being recorded, aren't we? I'm very fascinated by AR VR field. I just feel like there's so much more we can do than a tiny little device. I'm also a firm believer that if you really want to deliver haptic sensation, you need something physical. So it goes back to what is the most clever way of building mechanical structures that will support experiencing VR. I remember many years ago, so VR has come and go sort of in multiple waves. I remember my advisor talking about a nice warm hand that can squeeze you when you're going through therapy to get over height phobia, whatever the word is. I think if you know you're in a VR scenario, you're riding an elevator up and down, try to get over the fear of height. If you just had a warm little thing that squeezed down your hand, like a friend who's taking the ride with you, how would that, enhance the experience or something, can we find something like that? I think it's very hard to say, you're doing virtual reality, you're in a sort of fight, sparring, and then you want to be able to feel the kick on your foot if you hit your opponent, and if you hit them with a sword, you're going to feel something. That seems very challenging, but can we find some sweet little app like, virtual therapy or something that I'm hoping we will get somewhere. And it also, just like this seems to me will really benefit people, right? So that should be something very worthwhile to do. My imagination is probably very limited. I don't know what you all think, in terms of future of haptics, devices, scenarios, and all that. Other than gaming, Eric.
I'm also with you on the pain side. Yeah, I'm not super excited to jump into VR so I can feel what it's like to be, stabbed and poked. So yeah, I love your vision of it being more of a way to support and bring kind of like care and like the connection that we all kind of miss. So that's beautiful. Before we do kind of wrap things up, the kind of final question is for our listeners who are here, how do they find you? And if they're a haptic designer, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh, so the easiest thing is Google me on Purdue website. It's Hong Tan, my word, at purdue.edu. And then Purdue is spelled as Purdue. There's another Purdue, Perdue. It's a chicken farm. It won't get to me.
Do they have a Hong at the chicken farm? That would be pretty funny. Awesome.
I want to find out.
Awesome. This has been such a great conversation, Hong. Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, we just enjoyed the conversation so much of everything about haptics. You've covered so many different areas, given us all something to think about, people that are new to this space, something to look into, just ideas to spark the next inspiration that they're working on. For anyone who's listening, this is kind of where we call it to an end. But you can find us at thehapticsclub.com, of course. Follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter. We have a live blog going on. We've got a lot of really great conversations going on there. Featured articles from hapticians. And if you want Haptics Club swag, we've got a store /hapticsclub.com/store. And of course, catch the next episode every other week. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on all the major platforms. And of course, we want to thank our sponsor, Haptics Industry Forum. Check them out at hapticsif.org. And they keep the lights on, they keep coffee in our hands, tea in our hands, glasses of water. So we really appreciate it, the support. And to anyone listening, thank you for being a part of the haptics community. We appreciate you so much. And we'll see you at the next episode.